Rain hit the street like it had a grudge, turning every curb in New Orleans into a river I had to outrun. I was barefoot. The asphalt was slick and cold, and each step sent a sting up my legs like the city was biting back. Somewhere above my left eye, warmth kept spilling, slipping down my cheek and into my mouth wrong. I didn't need a mirror. My body already knew what had happened inside that townhouse. Behind me, headlights kept sweeping the flooded blocks, slow and patient, the way a predator circles when it's sure the prey has nowhere to go. I tried not to think his name, because it made him bigger and me smaller. So I thought of Eli instead, his little backpack by the door, the cartoon patch he chose himself, the way he said goodnight like he trusted the world. That trust was the reason my chest hurt worse than my ribs. I was running without him, and it felt like leaving a piece of my heart in a locked room. Rain shoved against me in sheets, blurring streetlights into smeared gold, and even the horns sounded drowned. I forced air into my lungs anyway. In, out, in, out. Just keep moving. Stopping meant going back, and going back meant the story on his lips would become my whole life. Unstable, unfit. The single mom who cracked, the woman who disappeared. A flash of light bounced off puddles and caught my shadow, long and shaking. The headlights were closer now, turning the corner I had just crossed. I cut left without thinking, diving between two shotgun houses, then through a yard where wind tore at a sagging fence. Branches slapped my face. Mud grabbed my feet. The world narrowed to the sound of my own breath and the wet thud of my steps, and I heard an engine idle, then roll again. He wasn't speeding. He didn't need to. He was sure I'd break. My fingers curled around the strap of Eli's backpack. I'd snatched it on instinct, like my hands remembered mothering even while my mind was on fire. It bumped against my hip with every step, a small weight that kept me honest. I wasn't escaping for drama. I was escaping for tomorrow. In that moment, I realized how easy it was to be invisible in a storm. I slipped between live oaks and the darker edge of an empty lot, then pushed into a line of trees that looked like they led nowhere. Leaves whipped in the wind, and the air smelled like river mud and wet iron. I tasted blood again and swallowed it down. My vision tunneled. Pain came in waves, not sharp so much as relentless, like my body was filing a complaint with every muscle. Still, I ran. The trees opened onto a private road, smoother than the streets, framed by old lamps that glowed through the rain like watchful eyes. At the end of it stood a wrought iron gate so tall it vanished into the darkness, spiked at the top like the city had grown teeth. I didn't know whose property it was at first. I only knew it looked like the kind of place you didn't reach by accident. My shoulder hit the bars. Cold metal jolted through me. I gripped it anyway because it was solid, because it didn't move. A camera mounted on a stone pillar swiveled toward me with a soft mechanical hum, calm and precise, like it had been waiting. An intercom crackled, and a voice came through low and steady, asking what I was doing bleeding on someone else's land, asking who had done it. My throat tried to answer and failed. 8 words were for people who felt safe. All I had was shaking breath and the thrum of headlights behind me. The beams swept across the trees again, bright enough to turn rain into silver needles. The SUV was there, just beyond the bend, creeping closer. My stomach dropped. He'd found the road. Of course he had. He always found the road. I wanted to scream for help, but I could already hear how the scream would be translated. Hysterical woman, dramatic girlfriend, unstable mother. So I stayed silent and pressed my forehead to the iron, letting the cold bite keep me awake. Footsteps approached from inside the property, measured and unhurried, not running the way I was running, not panicking the way I was panicking. In the corner of my vision, a figure moved under an umbrella of darkness, tall and still, as if storms had learned to respect him. I didn't know his face yet, but I knew the name people whispered at docks and bars, the name tied to quiet power and older money, Dominic Russo. The intercom went quiet for a beat. Then metal groaned. Locks released. The gate began to open. It wasn't fast. It wasn't generous. It was deliberate, like a decision being carved into the night. I stumbled forward through the widening gap, and the moment I crossed the line, my knees finally admitted they were done. The backpack slipped from my shoulder. My hands reached for air. The world tilted, rain spinning into a blur. What happened behind that gate changed everything. To understand how I ended up there, I have to take you back that evening, to the pretty cage. From the outside, the waterfront townhouse looked like a postcard. Glass facing the river, lights on the balcony, everything arranged to make strangers envy. Inside, it was too clean to feel lived in. The air smelled like lemon polish and expensive cologne. Every surface shone, and the shine made my nerves louder. Grant Whitaker thrived on that contrast. In public, he was the rising assistant district attorney, the man people pointed to and called promising. He held rooms with a steady smile, and he knew how to sound kind while staying in control. I used to think a man like that meant safety. I didn't understand that safety can be staged. The first bars were wrapped in help. He replaced my phone. He suggested we share accounts so he could manage bills and school forms, because I was a single mom and always exhausted. I let him. And because Eli needed stability, and I wanted to believe love could also be relief. Then the help became a system, and the system became a leash. My phone started acting strange. Messages failed, calls cut out. Contacts disappeared. When I tried to rebuild my list, numbers vanished again, as if the device was erasing me on purpose. Grant always seemed to know who had reached out. Friends drifted away after he spoke to them with that polished concern, making distance sound respectful. Money tightened next. My card worked until it didn't. When it failed, he appeared with a solution that sounded generous and felt like proof that access belonged to him. Groceries and gas became things I earned by staying calm. The lesson was quiet and constant. You live here because I allow it. Even silence watched me. My small cameras sat in corners of the entryway and hallway, sleek enough to pass as decor. Grant called them security. To me, they were eyes that never blinked. I started moving like someone being graded, careful with my face, careful with my breath. The townhouse was beautiful, and it never felt private. Eli was the reason I became good at pretending. I kept mornings normal. I packed lunches, brushed hair, asked about spelling tests, laughed at jokes that weren't funny. I learned to speak softly and move slowly because suddenness made Grant focus on me the way you focus on a glass about to shatter. I started counting time without meaning to, measuring how long it took the deadbolt to chirp after the door shut. That chirp became the sound my body listened for more than thunder. And Grant didn't need to threaten me with his hands to make me obey. He threatened me with his reputation. He talked about courts and custody like the outcome was already decided. He made it clear that if I ever left, the story would be written before I could open my mouth. Unstable woman, unfit mother, dramatic girlfriend who needed help. He knew which words would make people nod instead of question him. That evening, the storm rolled in before sunset. Wind rattled the balcony doors, and rain crawled down the glass in thick streaks. Grant dressed for a charity reception, polished and perfect, the kind of man strangers would defend without knowing him. I stood in the bathroom with a damp cloth pressed to my temple, trying to calm the ringing in my head and the fear under my skin. The mirror showed a woman with eyes that never fully rested. When he left, the townhouse fell into its unnatural quiet. Eli was asleep, small and warm under his blanket, trusting. I stood in the hallway and tried to decide what kind of mother I was allowed to be. The one who stayed and survived, or the one who ran and risked everything. That was when I saw what he had changed. The school app still listed me, but not first. Grant's name sat above mine now. Primary pickup, primary contact, primary everything. He had done it with a few taps, the same way he erased my contacts. If I ran with Eli, he could call it kidnapping. He could take my child in the name of protecting him from me. My hands shook so hard I had to grip the counter. Escape stopped being a fantasy and became a math problem with my son's future as the price. Then, at 7:42 p.m., the power blinked. Not a full outage, just a hiccup. Lights dimmed for a breath, like the house closed its eyes. Near the front door, the lock reset with a tiny click, and for the first time in years, that sound felt like mercy. I looked at Eli's backpack on the hook, small and bright against the expensive wall, and I understood the cruel twist Grant had built for me. The safest way to save my son was to leave without him, find help, and come back with witnesses. I hated myself for it, and I did it anyway. Outside, the storm covered my footsteps. Inside, that lock would only stay open for 3 seconds. I held my breath, grabbed the handle, and ran. Inside the townhouse, the storm sounded like it was trying to get in. Wind shoved rain against the glass and made the balcony doors rattle in their frames. Every creak of the building felt amplified, like the house was reminding me it belonged to him, not me. I moved barefoot across imported tile, careful not to let my breathing turn into noise. At 7:42 p.m., the lights blinked. Not off, not on, just a stutter in the current. For a heartbeat, the air changed, and then I heard it. The tiniest click from the electronic deadbolt, a mechanical exhale that said the system had reset. 3 seconds. That was all the world gave me. I didn't think. Thinking was how fear talked me into staying. My hand went straight to the hallway hook where Eli's little backpack hung. I grabbed it like it was a lifeline, the strap rough against my palm, the childish patch pressing into my skin. No shoes, no phone, no wallet. Anything I touched would slow me down, and slow meant captured. The front door opened with a soft sigh. And the storm slapped me hard enough to steal my breath. Rain hit my face and mixed with the warm line at my temple. The street outside was a sheet of moving water. The first step onto the porch felt like stepping off a cliff, but my feet kept going anyway. I ran with the backpack bouncing against my hip, hearing the townhouse behind me settle back into silence. The deadbolt chirped again, sealing itself, sealing Eli inside with the lie of safety. The guilt tried to hook me by the ribs, but I yanked free and kept running. I told myself one sentence over and over. I'm coming back with help. I'm coming back with help. New Orleans at night is usually loud, alive, messy in a way that makes you feel less alone. That night, the streets were emptied by weather and fear. Streetlights smeared gold across puddles. Water climbed the curbs and swallowed the edges of sidewalks. Wrought iron fences stared through the rain like black ribs. Somewhere in the distance, a siren rose and fell, muffled by wind, like the city was crying and trying not to admit it. I cut through alleys between shotgun houses, ducked under drooping branches, and slid on slick bricks that felt older than my panic. My lungs burned. My toes went numb. Each breath tasted like river air and metal. I could feel my heartbeat in my throat, loud enough to betray me. Headlights appeared behind me, bright and patient, not frantic, not searching, hunting. The beams swept across the flooded street, caught my shadow, then followed it. My stomach dropped, because I knew what that meant. Grant had left whatever room full of donors and cameras he'd been charming, and he'd gotten the alert that his property was missing, and he'd come to collect it. I didn't let myself picture his face. I pictured Eli instead, asleep with one hand curled around his blanket, trusting the adults in his world to be safe. I pictured Ms. June's warm voice from after-school pickup, telling him to take his time tying his shoes. And I pictured the school office screen where Grant's name sat above mine like a verdict. If I failed tonight, Eli wouldn't just lose me. He'd lose the truth of me. The SUV rolled closer. Tires hissed through water. I veered into a patch of trees where the street lamps couldn't reach, branches clawing at my hair and skin. Mud sucked at my feet. My ankle twisted and I nearly went down, but the backpack strap pulled tight across my shoulder and kept me upright, unlike my son's weight was holding me to the world. I ran blind between oaks until the ground changed under me, smoother, quieter, a private road hidden behind the mess of the city. At the end of it rose an iron gate so tall it disappeared into darkness, framed by stone pillars slick with rain. I slammed into it and grabbed the bars, shaking, desperate for anything solid. A camera on the pillar turned toward me with a soft whir. An intercom crackled, and a low, dangerous calm filled the air, asking what I was doing here and who had hurt me. The words wanted to come out, but my throat locked. Behind me, the headlights swung into view at the bend. My tongue felt useless, full of rain and copper. I gripped the iron and listened to that calm voice waiting for an answer I couldn't give. In the SUV's glare, I saw my reflection in metal, a stranger begging without words, alone at last. Then the gate began to open. I stumbled through the gap, and in that split second my mind finally caught up to the name that lived in whispers along the docks. Dominic Russo. The storm outside, the man inside, both inevitable. My knees gave out as soon as I crossed the line. The backpack slid from my shoulder. Rain spun into darkness, and I fell. I woke to the steady drumming of rain on a high window, the kind of sound that usually meant I should check the locks. Here it only meant the storm was still angry outside, and I was still breathing. The sheets were crisp and cool against my skin. Something soft supported my head. The air smelled faintly of clean linen and antiseptic, not river mud and fear. When I tried to move, my ribs argued. A tight wrap held my torso, and my left temple felt taped and tender. My hands shook as if the cold had moved inside my bones. I blinked hard, expecting to see a keypad, a guard, a closed door. In Grant's world, waking up always came with conditions. Instead, footsteps approached with no rush. A woman in dark scrubs came into view, hair pinned back, eyes sharp in a tired way that felt familiar. She checked the bandage at my head, pressed 2 fingers to my wrist, and watched my face the way someone watches weather. I learned her name through the calm way she carried it. Dr. Nina Park. She explained what she was checking and what she wasn't, and the strangest part was that she didn't ask me to perform my story. She focused on my breathing, my pain level, my dizziness, and then told me I was safe for now. A tray sat on the bedside table with a glass of water that hadn't been there when I first opened my eyes. The water looked almost blue in the low light, like it belonged to a different life. Beyond the half-open doorway, a hallway stretched quiet and polished. At the far end, a man stood with another larger man, both of them angled toward a wall of security screens. The nearer one had the posture of a bodyguard. The other was stillness itself. I didn't need anyone to announce him. Even from that distance, he carried a kind of gravity, the feeling of a room rearranging to make space. He turned his head just once, and his gaze brushed the doorway like a question he refused to ask aloud. Dark suit, no tie, hair damp at the edges as if he'd stepped through the rain without noticing it. Dominic Russo. The name landed in my head with the weight of every dockside whisper I'd ever overheard. He didn't come closer. He didn't fill the doorway with his body the way Grant used to, blocking air and options. Dominic set something down, another glass, I couldn't tell, then walked away, leaving the space around me untouched. That absence was so unfamiliar it made my skin prickle. I waited for the catch, the price, the moment someone would say I owed them. Dr. Park finished her checks and left with the quiet confidence of someone who expected to be obeyed by pain. The door to my room stayed exactly as it was. Not shut, not guarded, simply open. At first, I assumed it was a mistake. I stared at the gap like it was a trick of light. Then I pushed myself upright and listened. No footsteps rushing to stop me. No electronic chirp of a deadbolt. And no warning voice. I tested the door with my fingertips, then with my whole hand, opening it wider, closing it a fraction, opening it again. My brain kept insisting that freedom was a glitch that would correct itself the moment I trusted it. I half expected a hand to appear on my shoulder, firm and smiling, steering me back inside. My heart beat too fast for the quiet room. Finally, I swung my legs off the bed and stood. The hallway outside was wide and dim, lit by recessed lamps that threw soft pools of gold onto dark wood floors. Somewhere below, a grandfather clock marked seconds with a patient tick. I moved one step at a time, toes curling against the cold planks, shoulders tight, eyes searching corners. Every closed door looked like a future cage. Every shadow looked like it could move. I made it to the rail overlooking the foyer and saw that the front doors were locked from the inside, heavy and secure. But not because I was trapped, because whoever lived here protected what was theirs. That distinction hit me harder than the fall in the rain. Grant locked me in to shrink me. Dominic locked his world to keep danger out. The difference was choice, and my body didn't know what to do with it. I could turn back or keep walking. No one timed my steps. I followed the faint smell of coffee drifting deeper in the house, toward a question I hadn't heard in years, one that didn't arrive with a threat, and I forced myself forward anyway. I moved through Dominic Russo's house the way I used to move through Grant's townhouse, quietly, measuring every sound, expecting punishment for taking up space. The difference was that nothing here tried to swallow me. The hallway lights were low and warm, not harsh. The air carried rain, old wood, and something bitter and comforting drifting from deeper inside. I kept my hand on the wall for balance, partly because my ribs still ached, partly because I needed proof that the world was solid. Every few steps I paused, listening for a lock to click, for a voice to tell me I had gone too far. Nothing came. Only the soft tick of a clock and the distant hush of rain easing outside. I followed the smell of coffee down a wide stairway and into a kitchen that looked used, not staged. A pot simmered on the stove, and a single mug sat near the counter as if someone expected to drink it in peace. Dominic was there, shoulders relaxed, sleeves rolled, and moving with the same careful control I had seen at the gate, only quieter. He did not turn fast when he sensed me. He let me be the one to choose whether I entered the room or retreated. That alone made my throat tighten. Grant always met me with a doorway, a body, a claim. Dominic met me with space. He set a second mug on the counter and nudged it closer without looking to see if I would take it. Black coffee, the way I drank it when I could not afford cream and could not afford to waste time. My hands hovered over the mug, unsure if warmth was allowed. In my old life, kindness always arrived with a receipt. I took a careful sip anyway, because my body recognized comfort before my mind could argue it away. The coffee burned my tongue and steadied me at the same time. For a moment, we existed in a silence that did not feel like a threat. The rain softened to a whisper, and somewhere a generator hummed, patient and low. I watched Dominic's hands, the way they moved with precision, and I wondered how a man built for violence could learn restraint. Then my gaze fell to the strap of Eli's backpack hanging from my wrist like a confession. I had not let it go since the gate. Dominic noticed, not with curiosity, but with the kind of attention that counts exits and risks. The way he held his shoulders changed, almost imperceptibly, as if a child's presence shifted the math. I could have lied and called it a cousin's, a neighbor's, anything. But my exhaustion stripped me down to truth. I told him, in the only way I could, that I was a mother, and my son was still inside Grant Whitaker's reach. I explained how Grant did not need to chase me with fists. He chased with paperwork, on with permissions, with the threat of being labeled unstable. I felt shame saying it, like I was admitting failure instead of describing a trap. Dominic did not interrupt, did not push for names, dates, details. He listened the way a man listens when he is already building a plan in his head. When he finally spoke, it was not a demand, not an interrogation, but a single steady question about the danger that would come to his gate. He made it clear, in that calm tone, that whoever hurt me would come looking, and he needed to know what he was dealing with when I was ready. The words "when I was ready" landed like something holy. No one had offered me time in years. My instinct still searched for the hidden hook, the moment he would collect. But he only turned the burner down, rinsed his hands, and kept his distance as if my boundaries were part of his own code. I realized I was not being watched to be controlled. I was being watched to be protected. That distinction made my eyes sting harder than the rain ever did. I was still not ready to tell him everything, because saying it out loud would make it real. Yet I also knew Grant would not stop at pressuring me in private. He would turn my disappearance into a performance, a love story for strangers, a tragedy where he played the hero. And when that performance hit the airwaves, every camera in the city would feel like another lock. Dominic's silence told me he understood that too, and that he had already decided the storm would not be the last place I had to fight. I held the hot mug, breathing, knowing the next battle would be public, and I would watch him lie on television again. The house was quiet in a way that should have soothed me, but silence had never been neutral in my life. Even with rain tapping the windows and warm light pooling over the hardwood, I felt exposed, like the world could still reach me through the air. Dominic's people had handed me a phone that could connect to the outside without revealing where I was, and the glow of the screen made my stomach tighten. Safety is complicated when your name has already been turned into a story for strangers. The video loaded fast, and there he was. Grant Whitaker, hair slightly messy in a way that looked practiced, eyes pink in a way that looked believable. He stood at a podium with microphones and a row of official faces behind him. A banner at the bottom of the screen carried my name like it belonged to him. I watched his mouth form concern, watched his hands open in the universal gesture of "please help us," watched the crowd nod as if they were witnessing love. He described me as fragile without using the word. He made it sound like I had been struggling, like he had been carrying me through storms I created. He mentioned mental health in that careful way that plants a seed while keeping his hands clean. He spoke about me needing rest, needing support, needing professionals, and the comments began to scroll beside the video, strangers diagnosing me like they were reading a menu. Every word was a soft rope meant to pull me back into his hands. My skin went cold despite the blanket on my legs. I tasted bile and swallowed it down. I wanted to throw the phone across the room, to erase his face, but I couldn't look away because this was how he kept me trapped. Not with walls, with witnesses who never saw what happened after the doors closed. My hands shook so hard the phone rattled against my palm. I thought of Eli waking up and asking for me, and I imagined Grant answering with a smile that made adults relax and made children quiet. Dominic was in the doorway, not looming, just present. He didn't ask to see the screen. He already understood what it meant. The way he listened while I described Grant's performance made me realize something sharp. Grant wasn't searching for me. He was building a version of me the city would accept. Dominic said it without saying it, the idea settling into my bones. Cameras can be bars if you let them. A few minutes later, Briggs, And the security chief, with the calm of someone who has seen worse storms than weather, brought a tablet to the kitchen island. He didn't look at me with pity. He looked at me like I mattered to the plan. On the screen was Eli's school contact portal. The primary pickup permissions had been changed that morning. Grant had added himself again and removed anyone who might question him. The note field had new wording that made my chest seize. Concerns about mother's stability. I stood too fast and pain flashed bright across my ribs. My mind ran ahead of my body, already seeing Grant walking into the office with his badge and his gentle voice. Already seeing Eli handed over like a clipboard. I felt the old panic rise, the familiar urge to bargain, to apologize, to make it stop. Then Dominic's steadiness cut through it. He didn't promise miracles. He promised steps. He made it clear that if we moved loudly, Grant would call it a kidnapping, and the city would applaud him for saving my son. That was the cruel genius of Grant's world. He could hurt us and still look like the hero. Dominic treated that like a weakness instead of a wall. Performances have patterns, and patterns have blind spots. He asked for details I could offer without cracking open completely. Eli's schedule, the name of the caretaker at after school, the way Grant liked to arrive early so he could control the room. I told him about Ms. June, the older woman who always tied Eli's hoodie strings and called him sweetheart. Saying her name out loud felt like handing over the only safe corner of my week. Later, when I was alone again, and I realized the micro-twist hiding inside the calm. Dominic wasn't waiting for me to beg him to save my child. While Grant was performing devotion on camera, Dominic had already started a quiet extraction plan built on discretion and witnesses, not force. That plan meant Eli could be moved without becoming a headline or a prop. I sat with my hands wrapped around cold water, listening to rain fade, knowing the war had shifted. It was no longer just my body at risk. It was my motherhood on trial in public. And somewhere in the layers of Grant's polished lie, Dominic's people were starting to dig, because men like Grant never hurt only one woman. They repeat forever. By the next morning, the storm had moved on, but the pressure stayed. Dominic's house felt calm, almost too calm, like the air was holding its breath with me, and men came and went in quiet shoes. Screens glowed in a room I wasn't invited into, and still I understood what was happening. Someone was peeling Grant Whitaker apart, layer by layer. I tried to be useful without being in the way. I washed my hands until my skin hurt. I checked my phone, then hated myself for caring what the world believed. Every few minutes I thought of Eli's small face and felt my chest tighten. Safety was a room I could stand in, but not a place my mind could stay. Dominic didn't flood me with questions. He let time do its work, and time, for once, was on my side. Outside, the city was already buzzing, already choosing its hero. I knew Grant would speak first, and his father's allies would nod. That certainty knotted my stomach tight. Later that day, Briggs laid a stack of printouts on the kitchen counter. Not for me to read, but close enough that I caught fragments. Sealed case numbers, dismissed charges, names of developers, councilmen, donors I had seen on gala invitations. Each line looked ordinary until you noticed the repetition. Every name followed by a payment. Every payment routed through something bland and forgettable. Dominic's people called it a ledger of gratitude, and I understood it as a price list for silence. Then came the women. Not headlines, just thin files with dates and addresses. One moved states overnight. One was placed on a psychiatric hold after a boyfriend's worried report. One simply vanished. My throat went dry because the pattern wasn't random. It was a blueprint. Grant didn't invent it. He inherited it, refined it, and used it like a weapon designed to erase inconvenient stories. When I tried to remember my own first months with him, I saw the same steps: charm, isolation, paperwork, then the quiet threats. That evening, Dominic asked me to sit in his study. He kept the lights low, like he knew brightness could feel like an interrogation. He set a photograph on the desk and slid it toward me without touching my hands. A woman stared back, mid-20s, dark hair, kind eyes that looked too trusting for this city. I felt my face drain before my mind caught up. Tessa Lane. Grant had mentioned her once, early, the way someone mentions a bad roommate who moved out. Casual, dismissive, designed to teach me not to ask. Seeing her frozen on glossy paper made my stomach twist because she wasn't a rumor anymore. She was a person with a smile that had once meant hope. Dominic watched my reaction the way you watch a fuse. I'm patient, careful. The silence between us filled with unspoken facts. And I realized the worst part. I recognized her because Grant had rehearsed her disappearance into his mythology. If she existed, then she could also be found somehow. Dominic's team had traced her last signal to a marsh property owned through one of Judge Whitaker's trusts. But the marsh was a decoy. The real answer was cleaner. Tessa had been committed under a false name to a rural psychiatric facility, the kind hidden behind pine trees and polite euphemisms. The paperwork carried Judge Whitaker's signature, the ink neat and official, the diagnosis vague enough to swallow any protest. 2 years of being alive on paper and absent everywhere else. My vision blurred, not from tears, but from the idea that a person can be buried without a grave. I imagined Eli standing in a school office while strangers spoke softly about my instability, and I nearly choked. This was Grant's endgame for me. Not to break me loudly, but to file me away until my own voice sounded unbelievable. And the city would applaud the Whitakers for their compassion, never noticing the cage. The thought made me furious enough to breathe, furious enough to stay visible again today. I sat very still, letting that fury settle into something harder than fear. I told Dominic, in my own stumbling way, that I would not disappear quietly. I would not let Grant turn my motherhood into a diagnosis, and my survival into a rumor. Dominic didn't promise comfort. He promised movement. Briggs stepped into the doorway with updates, and I could tell by his tight jaw that Eli's situation was already shifting, and that Grant was tugging on every legal string he owned. At the same time, Dominic's people were preparing to pull Tessa out before the Whitakers could tighten their grip. 2 rescues, 1 clock, and a city full of cameras waiting to be fed. I understood then that opening the gate had been the easy choice. What came next could ignite a war, because men like Grant don't lose gracefully. Still, I felt the next domino click into place, and I leaned forward instead of back. Somewhere out there, Grant was smiling for the cameras, unaware we were coming. Waiting is its own kind of torture when you are a mother. I was in Dominic's house, wrapped in clean blankets, surrounded by quiet wealth, and my mind kept sprinting back to a fluorescent hallway where Eli's name sat on a clipboard. Every time a door latched in the estate, my shoulders jumped. Every time a phone vibrated, my pulse followed. I tried to breathe the way Dr. Park coached me, but my body still listened for Grant's key. Dominic did not order me to stay put, yet I hovered near the kitchen anyway, close to the people who carried updates in their eyes. Briggs moved through the rooms like a calm wall, steady and heavy. He spoke in simple phrases, the kind you can hold without breaking. Eli would be picked up at aftercare the way he always was. Ms. June would keep him calm. Nothing would look unusual. We needed the handoff to feel boring, because boring is invisible. I pictured Ms. June calming Eli with peppermint-scented hands and a steady smile. She could sense danger in a room before anyone named it. She did not know Dominic Russo, and she did not need to. She only needed to protect my boy for one more afternoon. Grant arrived early. I did not see him, but I felt him the moment Briggs's posture tightened. An assistant had walked into the school office with fresh paperwork, and Grant followed, calm, polite. already smiling for an audience that did not realize it was being recruited. He carried updated permissions and a printed note about my instability. He framed it as concern for Eli, as if love were a badge and I were a risk. Dominic's people did not storm the building. They did not raise voices. They knew a scene would feed Grant's story. Instead, they moved like shadows with receipts. A woman from Dominic's legal team arrived first, simply present, carrying the correct forms and the right signatures. Briggs stayed out of sight because his body would have changed the tone. The goal was not to win a fight. The goal was to leave no footage that could be edited into a headline. While that slow battle unfolded under office lights, another one unfolded far from New Orleans, in a facility that looked helpful from the road. Tessa Lane's file had a false name, a vague diagnosis, and a schedule that reduced a person to checkboxes. Dominic's team walked in with documentation and quiet authority, the same language the Whitakers had used to trap her. The cruelty of that symmetry made my stomach turn. I sat at Dominic's table and stared at the wood grain until it blurred. I kept thinking about how easy it would be for Grant to take Eli in front of witnesses and call it justice. I kept thinking about Tessa, waking to another day of silence and being told the silence was her fault. I pressed my palm to my ribs and forced myself upright, because if I fell apart, I would waste time we could not spare. Ms. June had kept Eli in the reading corner, making the afternoon feel like a game. The office staff were hesitating, trapped between Grant's authority and their own discomfort. Dominic's lawyer was speaking in that calm professional rhythm that makes people reconsider their choices. Then the message I was praying for arrived. Eli was released to the caretaker he knew, not to the man with the badge. Minutes later, Tessa was guided out through a side entrance, not rushed, simply escorted as if the whole thing had been a paperwork mistake. I imagined her blinking at daylight like it was a foreign language. I imagined her shoulders bracing for someone to call her back. No one did. The car that brought Eli to me rolled into Dominic's courtyard after sunset, and I walked to the door on legs that felt borrowed. When Eli stepped inside, the smell of him hit me first, soap and crayons and that faint sweetness of the snack Ms. June always kept for him. His backpack was still twisted the way my hand had left it. He looked smaller than I remembered and braver than he should have had to be. He did not ask why I was there. He told me, with the solemn seriousness of children, that Grant had said I was going away to get help and that I should stop making trouble. He also mentioned a black folder with a gold sticker and a gray key fob Grant kept flipping in his hand, like a nervous habit. Hearing that, I realized children notice what adults dismiss, and those little details can become truth later. I held Eli close, feeling his heartbeat match mine, and I understood the cost of tonight. Tessa was safe, I too, but the Whitakers would feel this loss and strike back. Grant would call it kidnapping, corruption, anything that saved his image. Dominic's people began collecting timestamps, signatures, receipts, because survival was no longer enough. We needed a bomb made of proof, and we needed it now. When Eli finally slept in the guest room, the quiet should have felt like victory. Instead, it felt like the moment after a siren stops, when your body keeps bracing for impact. I sat at Dominic's kitchen table with a legal pad and a cup of reheated coffee, and I realized hiding was just another kind of waiting. Grant could still narrate my life from a podium. If I stayed invisible, he would turn my silence into proof that he was right. Dr. Nina Park came in the next morning with the same calm she used when she checked my pulse. She had photographed my bruising and bandages the night I arrived, each image time-stamped, each note written in plain clinical language. No dramatics, no opinions, only what a body looks like after someone decides you belong to them. Seeing those pages lined up on the counter made me angry in a clean way, the kind that sharpens focus. Then Dominic's people laid out Tessa Lane's paper trail. 2 names, 1 woman, a false intake form, a vague diagnosis, and a signature that mattered more than truth. Judge Harold Whitaker's handwriting sat there like a stamp of God, neat and confident. I didn't need legal terms to understand it. A judge had authorized a cage. A facility had accepted money to keep the door shut. 2 years of life had been filed under the wrong name. Money was the next language. Dominic's accountant team pulled up transfers routed through shell companies with forgettable titles, the kind that sound like consulting and property management. Payments moved in small regular amounts, steady as rent, into the facility's accounts and out again to another layer of clean-looking businesses. I hated how normal it all appeared. Grant and his father did not need a basement or a gun to make women vanish. They needed invoices, signatures, and a city trained to trust them. We built a timeline on the dining room wall with sticky notes and printed screenshots, not because Dominic liked dramatics, but because patterns are harder to deny when you can touch them. A date when Tessa stopped answering. A date when Grant's career jumped forward. A date when a donor's case disappeared. My own date at 7:42 p.m. And when the lock clicked and I ran. Every point connected like a web. The more we mapped, the clearer it became. This was an operation, not an accident. Planning the release felt like choosing to step back into fire. Dominic wanted the truth to land where it could not be buried. And New Orleans had one room designed for that, the Louisiana Justice Legacy Gala. At 8 p.m., the ballroom would be full of donors, reporters, and the same people who had cheered the Whitakers for years. I pictured the cameras lifting, the comments scrolling, strangers calling me unstable. Then I pictured Eli growing up under Grant's last name, and my fear turned into something colder. We had to make it impossible for Grant to claim Dominic had abducted me. That meant witnesses. That meant medical notes. That meant my own choices recorded in writing, and signed and dated, so the story could not be flipped. Dominic's tech team prepared a file package that could run automatically on the venue screens, and his lawyer arranged for copies to be in multiple hands the moment it played. The point was not revenge. The point was removing his steering wheel. The day before the gala, Grant reached for me without reaching for me. A mutual contact I had not heard from in months sent a carefully worded message about concern and prayers, and then slid in a warning that powerful people were worried about my safety around criminals. It was polite. It was smooth. It was Grant speaking through someone else's mouth. Dominic read it once and handed the phone back like it was poison. I understood the real meaning. He knew Dominic's name, and he was already preparing his counterstory. Doctor. Park rechecked my ribs and wrote one more note. Not about pain, but about consistency, because abusers rely on confusion. She reminded me that truth is stronger when it is boring and repeatable. Dominic's crew rehearsed the timing the way musicians rehearse a song, quietly, without applause. I watched them and felt my old instinct to apologize for causing trouble. Then I remembered Tessa's file and stopped apologizing in my head. I would not shrink again for anyone with power. That night, I sat with Eli on the couch and watched him color, pretending our lives were normal. I told myself I was not dragging him into danger. I was dragging him out of it. When he fell asleep, I walked to the guest room mirror and practiced holding my own gaze. I didn't need to look fearless. I needed to look unmovable. The next evening, I would walk into that ballroom beside Dominic, not as his possession, but as a witness. The evidence was loaded and waiting. All that was left was my first step through the doors. Putting on the black dress felt like choosing a blade instead of a bandage. The fabric was plain and elegant, the kind that did not beg for attention, but it made me stand taller. My ribs still ached under the wrap, and every breath reminded me how close I had come to vanishing. I kept repeating one grounding fact. Eli was safe tonight, asleep at Ms. June's place, guarded by people Dominic trusted. If fear tried to pull me backward, I pictured my son's small hand curled around a crayon. and I stayed. Dominic waited near the door, calm and unreadable. He did not touch me, did not guide me by the waist. I did not perform a claim for the cameras outside. He simply matched my pace and kept the space around me steady, like a wall against wind. In the car, I watched rainwater streak across the window and told myself I was walking into the lion's den on purpose. The difference mattered. The gala sat inside a hotel ballroom dressed up as justice. Light poured from chandeliers onto tuxedos and gowns. Champagne flutes clinked like tiny bells. A quartet played something soft while donors laughed, careful and practiced. Everywhere I looked, there were lenses, phones, press cameras, the event photographer calling for smiles. It felt like the opposite of the storm that saved me. This was a controlled weather system, designed to make powerful people look clean. Judge Harold Whitaker stood near the stage as if he belonged there by divine right. In silver hair, confident posture, hands folded like he was blessing the room. Grant hovered at his side, polished and affectionate in the way that had fooled me once. He was working the crowd, accepting praise, touching shoulders, collecting loyalty. When his eyes finally landed on me, his smile held for a fraction, then fractured in tiny ways he could not hide. His jaw tightened. His gaze flicked to Dominic, then to me again, like he was searching for the version of me he had already written. I did not give him the flinch. I let the room see my face as it was. Tired, real, unbowed. Dominic stayed beside me without turning it into a show. Behind us, the doors opened again, and Tessa Lane walked in. Not glamorous, not staged, just present, shoulders drawn in, but standing. The air shifted as people recognized a ghost they had been told not to remember. Grant's color drained, slow and undeniable, like his body was admitting defeat before his mind could invent another lie. He moved toward me with that familiar confidence, closing distance as if proximity could rewrite reality. His posture carried the same message he used at home. I decide who you are. He angled himself so nearby cameras would catch his best side, then tried to make Dominic look like the threat by simply existing beside him. Watching it from the outside, I saw the trick clearly. Concern was his costume. Control was the man underneath. Then the ballroom screens flickered. For a heartbeat, people laughed like it was a technical problem. Then the first document filled the screens, crisp and official, all with Judge Whitaker's signature anchoring it. Another page followed with a false name and a facility letterhead. Dates stacked into 2 years that had been stolen without leaving a bruise the city could see. The next slide showed payments moving through shell companies, small and regular, funding a locked door. Then Dr. Nina Park's Times stamped notes and photos appeared, clinical and blunt, proof that my body had been treated like property. Finally, the timeline landed, connecting Tessa, connecting me, tying the Whitakers to a pattern that could not be shrugged off as a misunderstanding. The room froze, then erupted in a different kind of noise. Phones rose everywhere. Donors stared at the screens as if the light might burn them. Reporters pushed forward, hungry. Judge Whitaker's face emptied, on the way a mask looks when the face beneath it has left. Grant tried to rebuild his expression, but it kept slipping, each time faster. And then he snapped. Not with fists, but with words sharp enough to cut. The contempt he saved for closed doors spilled into the open, aimed at me, aimed at my past, aimed at the idea that a single mother without power should have stayed grateful and quiet. Every camera caught it. Dominic stepped between us with one calm movement, stopping escalation without stealing focus. Security converged, and this time it was not the kind paid to protect reputations. In the lobby, investigators and uniformed officers appeared as if they had been waiting for the signal the whole night. Grant looked at me one last time, hunting for fear. I held his gaze and felt something inside me crack and release, like a lock finally giving way. He looked away first. As the Whitaker circle collapsed into chaos, I took my first clean breath in years and knew the next season would be consequences, hearings, and rebuilding. And I would face it with Eli beside me and name intact. The city pretended it had always been on my side after the gala. One week, the Whitakers were the face of justice. The next week, they were the scandal everyone swore they never trusted. Headlines rotated, radios argued, and strangers in grocery lines leaned close as if my pain were a local sports score. I could feel eyes on me even in safe rooms, because fame is just another kind of surveillance when you did not ask for it. Investigators arrived like a tide that finally remembered how to move. Committees called emergency meetings. Our agencies that usually moved slow suddenly found urgency. Judge Harold Whitaker was pulled off the bench, his authority evaporating in public, and the courthouse halls that had once bowed for him started whispering his name with caution instead of respect. Grant was taken in, not with drama, but with paperwork and handcuffs and cameras that could not be bought back. The charges stacked up across offices and counties: false imprisonment dressed as care, blackmail disguised as discretion, obstruction wrapped in procedure. New Orleans has a talent for turning tragedy into gossip, and I became the newest dish on the table. People I had never met sent messages saying they believed me, then asked for details like entertainment. Others argued online that I must have been paid, or that Dominic was the real villain. I stopped reading comments after the first night my hands started shaking again. I learned that public sympathy can be as unstable as public cruelty, and neither one should decide my worth ever again. People kept asking if I watched the arraignment, if I replayed the ballroom footage, if I felt satisfied. I learned to answer with a small shake of my head. Revenge would have kept me tied to him. Closure, for me, looked like oatmeal on the stove, Eli's shoes lined up by the door, and a morning where I could breathe without checking every lock. I let the legal machine grind without making it my whole diet. Therapy became a calendar instead of a crisis. Some days I spoke in full sentences. Other days I only named sensations: tight chest, buzzing ears, the reflex to apologize for existing. Nights were still the hardest, and I would wake to a creak in the house and sit up ready to run. Then remember the door was mine, the key was mine, and Eli was sleeping in the next room. Safety was not a switch. It was a skill I had to practice like breathing. Tessa's recovery moved in quiet increments. The first time she drank coffee with her real name on the mug, she stared at the letters like they might disappear. She did not tell long stories at first. She listened. She watched sunlight through curtains. She flinched when a phone rang, then laughed at herself. The way you laugh when you realize your body learned terror too well. I saw grief in her, not only for what was done to her, but for the years the world kept turning without her consent. Dominic did not turn into a different man overnight. He was still careful, still guarded, still respected by people who feared him. But I watched him choose restraint in ways that cost him. He redirected money, rerouted crews, shut down the parts of his business that fed chaos for profit. He showed up for Eli's school meeting without taking over the room, sitting back, letting me speak, letting me be the parent in charge. Consistency became his language, and he never demanded gratitude as payment. The last trap Grant tried to spring arrived in a folder labeled concern. It was a prepared narrative meant to separate me from my son. Notes about instability, staged incidents, a plan to paint me as dangerous. Dominic's team intercepted it before it reached the court, and Ms. June's steady testimony, paired with school records and doctor documentation, stripped it of power. For watching that file collapse was the moment I understood something important. Truth does not win because it is loud. It wins because it is supported. When the sentencing dates finally appeared on calendars, I did not mark them with red ink. I marked the days I would pick up Eli from school, the days Tessa would start her first support group, the days I would meet with a contractor about a small building near the river. Justice was necessary, but it was not enough. I wanted a place where women could walk in and feel an open door before they ever met a storm. In my mind, the sign was already there, waiting for paint. Harbor House. Autumn in New Orleans feels like the city finally exhales. Spanish moss hangs like soft curtains over the sidewalks, and the air is warm without being heavy. In most mornings, I can hear a streetcar bell in the distance, and a neighbor's radio humming low, and for a second, I forget what it felt like to run. Harbor House sits on a quiet block not far from the river, a tired old building with good bones and cracked paint that used to make me nervous. Now the smell of fresh primer is my favorite kind of proof. It means something is being rebuilt on purpose, not repaired in secret. The first week I painted until my arms shook, not from fear, from effort. Eli helped by dipping a brush into a tray and making careful stripes along the baseboards, proud the way kids get when you give them real work. We dragged in donated beds and lined them up with enough space for people to breathe. I learned to assemble furniture without flinching at every thud, and every screw I tightened felt like I was tightening a promise. No one would be trapped here behind a pretty door again. In the kitchen, Ms. June taught me how to stock a pantry, like a grandmother preparing for a storm. Rice, soup, tea, peanut butter. The small normal things that make a person feel human when their world is falling apart. We set up a children's corner in the front room with a low shelf of books, crayons, a worn rug, and a basket of socks in every size. I chose Harbor House as the name because harbors are not fantasies. They are practical. They are places built for battered boats, for tired people, for weather that does not ask permission. Tessa came the day we hung the first sign. She moved slowly, still learning that her name would not be taken away again, but her eyes were steady. She helped me create an intake binder with simple questions and plenty of space for silence. Some women arrive ready to talk, others arrive only ready to sit. Tessa understood both. She would greet them with a calm presence, a cup of water set within reach, and the kind of patience that says you can exist here without performing your pain. Ms. June became the heartbeat of the house. She labeled shelves, fixed broken hinges, and somehow always knew when a newcomer needed food before they could answer questions. She kept Eli busy with homework at the kitchen table, and treated every scared woman like a niece who deserved respect. Watching her, I realized family is not always blood. Sometimes it is the person who keeps showing up with warm hands and practical love. Dominic visited without announcements. No motorcade, and no entourage filling the porch. He would arrive in the late afternoon, step inside only when I invited him, and ask what the house needed instead of what I owed. He funded repairs through legitimate channels and never put his name on the paperwork. When I thanked him, he redirected it toward the mission, like gratitude was not a currency he wanted to collect. The steadiness between us grew in the quiet spaces. Him holding the door while I carried a box, him leaving before the house felt crowded, him respecting the fact that my life belonged to me. Sometimes, when the city turns rainy again, my body remembers the first storm. I remember the iron gate, the camera turning, the low voice that could have been danger and instead became a choice. I remember waking to a glass of water and noticing the door was open. No guard, no lock. I just freedom sitting there like a dare. Harbor House is my way of leaving that door open for other women, even when their minds insist it must be a trick. Safety starts with choice, and choice starts with someone believing you deserve it. The first woman who arrived carried a bag and eyes that would not meet mine. She kept glancing at the exit, convinced it would vanish. Tessa showed her a room. Ms. June warmed soup, and I watched her shoulders drop 1 millimeter at a time. If you made it this far, I hope you felt that shift from fear to something sturdier. Tell me in the comments what you would name a place like this, or what the word home means after survival. If this story mattered to you, like it, share it with someone who needs a reminder, and subscribe so we can keep building a corner of the internet where people are not erased.